thank you for listening to By the Way, a podcast about contemporary art news, where I present stories about the art world to my co-host that they have most likely not heard about yet. My name is Eric. I'm an artist and art professional up here in Stockholm.
My name is Jenny Danielsson. I am also an art professional. I am not an artist, though, but I also based in Stockholm.
All right. So, this is our first guest host here. And, so we're going to see how this goes. It's a little bit of a different presentation. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about shrinkage.
Interesting. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show. I guess I'm your first guest. Am I not?
You are the first guest. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Or first and last.
We'll see.
All right. Well, maybe you want to briefly just tell people about yourself. I think people have kind of come to find out who Ando and myself are, but they have no clue who you are and why they should listen to you.
My name is Jenny Danielsson, and I'm based in Stockholm. I did art history at university, and later on I worked in a number of museums. I've also worked in a commercial gallery, but nowadays I primarily write about art for a couple of Swedish magazines. I also make a podcast called Danielsson and Carlson. It's me in collaboration with Mr. Oscar Carlson. It's more like a talk show, actually. And then I'm working on a solo project. It will be called The Art Word, sorry about that. And that will be a series of dynamic interviews. I'm working on that. I will get back to you with links and stuff later on.
Mm-hmm. As you guys know, I typically present Ando two stories or one story that he doesn't know anything about. This time around with a guest host, I actually am presenting only one story, and Jenny on the other side is going to present something to me in which hopefully I don't know anything about either. So, I don't know. Would you like to go ahead and present first?
I can start. I mean, as you just said, I've been to Los Angeles and I've spent about a month there. And on March 15, the LA Times announced that their chief curator, Helen Molesworth of MoCA, Museum of Contemporary Art, had been fired.
I'm really happy we did not pick the same thing, because that was the risk of doing this where we present something to each other. I saw this, but I didn't actually read much about it.
Do you know who she is? Do you know anything about her?
I know very little. Really, it's headlines on that one for me.
Okay, so she's actually someone I've been following, I think, since she started at MoCA, but in 2014, I think she started. Mm-hmm. She then relaunched their permanent collection, and that was, according to most people, a brilliant thing to do. Mm-hmm. She kind of left out many of the white male men, artists who we normally see in a permanent collection, and she replaced that with women of color and so on and so forth.
So she was more about inclusion than what...
Absolutely more about inclusion. And she also has a very, I think, interesting and sincere way of looking at herself as a person of privilege in a very, very powerful position. And she's not only talking about her privilege, she's also doing something about it. She's using the tools. And I think that's been very interesting to follow. Again, I mean, I live in Stockholm. I only read about these things. And I was very sad to see her go. But then again, what do we know? We don't know anything about this person. Mm-hmm. Somewhere along the lines, I read that she's very difficult to work with.
Okay.
Do you think that could be easy as that? She's a difficult person to work with. And then one day, someone who's her boss decides to fire her. Could it be that easy?
Absolutely. Yeah, it happens quite often. It seems like that you just have that horrible boss type of scenario. Or I would even take this to gallerists, that often they are not people persons. They aren't the human resource department. So there's a very good chance that she might be amazing as a curator, a great eye, brilliant ideas, and just absolutely horrible with somebody who needs to go to the doctor or pick up their kid from a soccer game or whatever. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the only reason, but do you know why she was actually fired? Or is there, what's the rumor mill?
The big why. No, we actually don't know why. We've heard about creative differences.
Is there any, what does that actually mean?
We don't really know what that means, as we. I mean, there's been talk about the fact that she has not gone along with going with very... Okay, so in America, as far as I understand, you always have a board of trustees. Mm-hmm. People who are important, who help the museum to raise funds.
Yes.
And she has not always taken these people by the hand, walking around art fairs, going to the home saying, I love your stuff.
I did actually read more on this story. Yes, that was one thing that they speculated, you're right, that she didn't suck up to the board of trustees potentially. And if I remember, I read one article that with a specific donor that was offended because they didn't she didn't compliment the collection as much as they wanted, so maybe she didn't pamper them as much. And then I think there was another one where she canceled on him a couple times, and she didn't wear her mittens with the important people. Maybe that was the case. We don't know. Again, I think this is a very interesting discussion, and reading all the articles around it, I find there's a very sincere discussion around the museum as a place. Because again, the museums have opened up. More people go to museums in Sweden than ever before, a recent study says. And I believe that what happens in the museum is actually important. Mm-hmm. Perhaps more important than it ever was before. This is not just a small academic setting. What they do and how they talk about things is important. But then I need to ask you, do you think that this kind of discussion is taking place within the museum because it's quite safe? Which discussion?
The discussion about race and privilege, about how we talk about history, how we talk about the contemporary. Is it taking place within the museum because it's a very safe institution? No one is really going to be that upset.
I think you might be onto something. I've not really considered that too much, but initially I'm thinking they can bring up some fairly radical ideas, or maybe not even radical, but potentially controversial, and still be able to hide behind a lot of the Board of Trustees, for say, or First Amendment, constitutional issues, which is maybe why they can do it. Maybe that's why it's good they can do it. Maybe that's why it's happening there versus in, with a private company. I mean, that's a good chance that it is a safe place. Is it the best place? Because I don't know if you're looking for, let's say, social change through representation of gender equality, or let's say LGBT rights or something like that. When you have audiences of a museum that are typically progressive already, somewhat more liberal in general, aren't you kind of already preaching to the choir? So is it really that safe? Or dangerous or controversial, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it is a safe place, but who are you really trying to have a conversation with then?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think it's interesting, and I think it's interesting that the LA Times has been reporting so much on this debate, because that is not primarily an art magazine at all. I was also thinking about social media in this context, because it's such a risky platform nowadays. I mean, we should be really happy that everyone can say whatever they want. Everyone has a voice. Everyone can create a Twitter account. But there's also, I don't know, I just really think there's so little room for proper reflection on things. Like that long discussion about things, when you really, really have the possibility and the option to think things through properly.
Is that the news cycle just in general, or that commentary on the news cycle that, content needs to be created all the time because the creators believe that the consumers want it 24 hours a day, and by always replacing the last story with something new is, you know, the end all.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're saying, this, if you always are creating content, everybody can be a voice, and you know, somebody like CNN always has to come out with the new breaking news. You never give anybody time for reflection.
No, and I think art typically is a forum or an arena, and the museum in particular it's a place where you can just stand in front of an artwork for hours and look at it.
Yeah, and that's actually a good thing with an exhibition that usually lasts in a museum setting for, let's say, 2.5 to 4 months, is I guess it does, at least for that time period, have a conversation that is a little bit slower than what you would be having on on Artnet, let's say. Yeah.
Of course, and I think that's really important. And then it's super important that a chief curator of a very big, important American institution can sort of redefine the canon almost by this. I'm referring to an exhibition called The Art of Our Time. It was in 2016, and I remember reading a lot about it at the time.
Has she been creating safe, controversial exhibitions? Is she being inclusive, just to be inclusive? Like, why is she controversial, and why would she get fired outside of being, maybe not the friendliest with the board of trustees and pampering of them, really edgy with what she was truly doing, which could have got her into hot water, from what you could tell at least?
You know what? No, and that's the thing. She's the MoCA is nowadays in collaboration with something called the Underground Museum. It's based in Arlington Heights. I don't really know that much about LA, but I know it's an area of the city that is not necessarily known to be high-end art. It's more like a neighborhood where people actually live. So, and this is a phenomenal institution in the middle of a residential area. They have a garden, and they show exhibitions that are of super high quality. They borrow a lot of work from MoCA, etc. So this is done in collaboration with someone called Noam Davis, his name is. He died a couple of years ago, but this is his wife and I think his son who's doing this. And she started that collaboration. And yes, maybe that is to be considered a bit radical, but it should not be radical. The big art museum should definitely open up and show the best of the best in every neighborhood, regardless of the people who live there. She did an exhibition with... was it Carey Marshall?
James Carey Marshall.
That's the one.
Or Carey James Marshall, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. That should not be a radical thing to do.
No, I actually, I worked with him on his exhibition in Copenhagen at Charlottenburg. And,
oh, yeah.
No.
That should not be a radical thing, right? He's a very good artist of our time.
He's a phenomenal artist. So, like, the topics that he's talking about are... they're important issues, but what he's doing isn't like radical. They're beautiful and they're great messages and they're portrayed very well. But in a multicultural city like LA, it seems pretty safe.
It makes total sense, doesn't it? So, no, I don't think she's been that radical. I think that she's probably used her position of power and... tried to change things, and maybe someone at the board didn't like that, or she was just very difficult to work with. I don't know. I just think it's been so interesting to follow this discussion. And within this discussion, I actually see a grain of willingness to do things in a new way. People discuss things at great length. They do it eloquently. And maybe that's exactly what we need. We need to talk about art. We need to talk about who we are in a new fashion, and we need to show new artists and just be a bit more real about things. In
researching what I was going to present to you was talking about institutions, and that more and more institutions are showing less and less artists, and those artists that are showing in LACMA and in other major museums in Europe and in the US is becoming a smaller and smaller number of artists. The work that's getting shown in large exhibitions, that are really getting the money behind them, is for fewer and fewer artists. And so Yeah, I mean, if she was trying to shake it up by trying to show some new stuff and kind of going against the grain of this funnel towards just a few artists, and again, probably white, older male artists, hats off to her, you know? I mean,
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's interesting. So tell me, what did you want to talk to me about?
Yeah.
Present a new idea for me.
Yeah, so it was in kind of line with what you were, talking with the art market. Well, that I kind of said that, I looked at the last 10 years, and there was an art study that came out from USB and Art Basel. They started at least doing it in 2007. They've been doing it annually, and then this annual report came out on kind of the health. It's the medical checkup of the art market. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Did you read about it? So you already have an idea that I was going to talk about?
Not this time around, actually.
Okay,
no.
All right, fair enough.
No.
So essentially what they're saying in this new report is that the art market has grown financially by a record amount. At the same time, galleries are closing for the first time at a minus growth rate. So in 2007, they were actually roughly 4.5% growth rate of galleries. So for every 5 galleries opened, 1 would close. Right now, for every major gallery that opens, 1 closes. And so sales are going up, but galleries are going down.
That is not good for the artists, is it?
No.
Because then if the museums are only showing the same artists, big productions that sort of travel around the world.
Your Sterling Rubies.
Sterling Ruby.
Being in LA.
And then you'd have gallery spaces, or fewer gallery spaces.
Yeah.
So what's happening to the artists then?
The artists are getting less opportunities, like you were saying, but also the galleries are getting less opportunities to show because of other market forces. So as you have art, and these are focused on about 5,000 of the largest art galleries in the world. So it's not these smaller galleries that are selling work for, let's say, $1,000 a pop. These are galleries that are probably $15,000 is their mean price. Is that those ones are unable to make rent because of let's say cost of real estate to keep a gallery open. Also art fair costs. So a gallery like Gagosian can do as many art fairs as they want a year because they only need to sell a couple pieces per fair, or per year actually, to cover all those costs. Where a smaller gallery, and I'll get to them later, is Team Gallery in New York and actually in LA, has decided they're not doing art fairs any longer because they lose money every time. And so it's a bad investment for them.
So I'm just thinking, so you would have the big galleries are doing really, really well. The middle range are not doing so well. Mm-hmm. And then there must be a lot of, let's say, artist-run spaces. Is that what's happening?
Well, yeah. Well,
according to this report,
the report doesn't actually take into artist-run spaces because those would be too small of tier ones. But what is happening is, or what they believe is happening, is a couple things. Is that you have these financial pressures coming from the big galleries that are raising the cost of art fairs, and what clients and people expect of galleries. More and more buyers are only going to art fairs and not to the galleries. So, and more major collectors are buying things sight unseen. Then also something that I wasn't aware of, that a lot of collectors on the higher end aren't paying for the work they're purchasing as quick as galleries would like. So a big gallery, to use Gagosian, has enough money in the bank. So if they sold a work for $1 million and it takes them 6 months to actually get full payment, they're going to be fine. But a smaller gallery that is running a little bit closer to a month-by-month type of thing might have a client that also has worked with Gagosian and is used to paying over a 6-month period. They need that money sooner because they need to pay their bills to keep open. And it was something like 16% of all sales take more than 3 months to actually close the financial part of the deal.
Really?
So you have galleries sitting there with bunches of money on the books for potential income that they're waiting on the clients to actually complete the payments.
That's so strange.
And
Why would you just not pay for something?
Well, they will pay. They're just...
yeah, but and where's the artwork?
Well, I mean...
During this time, is it at the collector's house?
Well, I don't know if you, from when you worked in galleries, but the couple that I've most recently worked with, there's been work in the gallery that's been paid for, that sits there for years. And then also the other way, where the gallery wants to sell something to a particular person for the status, the connection, the opportunity to open up a door, and they'll sell it, but then they gotta wait, and then they gotta deal with this person, where you would never get that with like a car dealership. Car dealership would say, you don't get the car until I get the money. I don't care almost as who you are. So that's an issue that's happening to a lot of the galleries, is financially they're becoming very unsolvable because of that.
The art market is really strange sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that in itself is just ridiculous. Of course you just pay. I mean, if you buy something, you pay for it, right?
You would think so. But people don't always pay as soon as they should. And also then you have obligations that come through contractual agreements with other galleries. So you have two galleries.
That could complicate things. Yeah.
So every party needs to wait.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a big pain. Then one of the big things that I didn't know about was gallery poaching, which has always happened, but that you have a mid-tier gallery that starts to build up an artist, that artist starts to get a little bit of momentum. That gallery is excited, like, all right, finally I got somebody who's going to be able to get me over the hump, only to get just picked up by,
That happens a lot, though.
And who loses out on that?
Well, the first gallery.
Exactly, and so that's putting them out of business more and more. Yeah.
That's interesting. So you would have these smaller galleries that find all the talent, the good artists out there. They're
taking the risk,
working with them, showing the first couple of shows, and then they're sort of being drawn out of it. Yeah,
and more artists and are saying.
But also, I mean, from an artist's perspective, of course, you would change the gallery if you did not see progress. Maybe if you had a couple of shows in the same space, the space hasn't changed. There's no art fairs. There's nothing happening for you. Of course, you change location if you get a good offer.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense as well.
So Team Gallery, which I referenced earlier, they've both decided they're done doing art fairs. And Team Gallery is one of the, in my mind, one of the better galleries out there in the U.S. when it comes to what they're doing, and that they just, like, it's not worth it anymore.
From a Swedish perspective, Magnus Carlson Gallery did not participate at Artnet this year for the same reason.
Yeah, and so I think as an artist, is an art fair really the best place for artists to go any longer?
Oh, no, not necessarily at all.
Yeah.
Can be good for you.
Yeah.
But I don't think artists, honestly, the art fair, it's not a place for art and for artists, is it really?
No, it's for art advisors, art collectors, and
it's not a pretty environment.
No, it's a horrible place to go to look at art.
So really, I don't know if the art fair is the best place for an artist.
Yeah.
But maybe if you work with a gallery and they do sell a lot there, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm very much in two minds about art fairs. I don't know if I like them or not. Well, I also think it's a bit crazy that we travel so much to see art. I don't know.
Yeah, off this, just as a quick side note of these 5,000 galleries they took in the survey, the average amount of art fairs that each one does is 5 per year.
5 is a lot, though.
And
I mean, 5
fairs a year. But
fairs a year, so that's a lot. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work that needs to be created and sent and shipped somewhere. Come on.
You take the money, calling each one $250,000 to about $250,000 per big fair. 5 fairs, you're looking at $1.2 million just in fair costs.
So this is interesting. We have so many galleries around the world participating in art fairs, and we don't really know whether that is good for the artist or bad for the artist. We don't know what that makes to the whole art world. Does it? I don't know.
What we do know is the rich are getting richer. The middle class or middle tier galleries are struggling and closing, and the wealth isn't trickling down. The collectors are not visiting those smaller or mid-tier galleries. So is this a gallery problem? Like the model that they're working with, that they're overspending? Is this a collector issue where the collectors are undereducated or just don't give a shit on what they're buying? They're just buying to buy. Well, I don't think it's an artist issue. It's just something artists have to worry about.
I mean, yeah, of course, but I think you're right. The artist is just the artist. They make things. And I think the market and what happens to their work is something different.
Again, back to this article that I read up with the owner of Team Gallery, he was quoted as saying the art system needs renewal, and there's a danger of it becoming codified. And if it becomes codified, it squashes the idea of the avant-garde.
Oh,
so
yeah,
if
totally.
you keep showing Alice cats everywhere, there's no avant-garde.
Of course, that makes sense. And so if we bring this back to what I was talking about, I think there's a very healthy discussion going on. I think the art world is talking about things in a different kind of way. We want to make things differently. We can record a podcast. We're not even journalists.
Hey. Don't ruin that. Our audience really thought we were...
No, what I'm trying to say is that I totally believe that art is important. I think that it has a very important role to play within the society at large. And I think what's happening in the art market sometimes is just not
reflection of really what's going on in the art world.
Exactly. I think there's so much more interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, it's like a two-tiered art world. There's the art world of where the money is and what's getting shown in the art museums and the art fairs. And then there's the art world where the artists are making the work. In my mind, that's the more interesting art world. It's just the more difficult art to access.
Oftentimes, unfortunately, and I think for that we need spaces. Mm-hmm. You need actual physical spaces to visit.
New models.
I'm not saying that the online world is not there and could not make part of it, but I think the actual space is becoming increasingly important. We need new spaces for contemporary art. Mm. Places that don't necessarily have big signposts, but places that are accessible for a lot of people. Maybe we just need more conversation about culture generally.
Mm. Do they maybe not need to be so centralized too? It seems like to a few markets, everybody thinking it's all Berlin, it's all New York, it's all London, it's all LA, and start to recognize that art is being created all over the place. It's brilliant and wonderful.
I think it's so important to remember that the center is where you are. So the center is not New York, it's where you are, and trust that, and just be yourself.
Thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it, and we'll see how it goes in the future. See if you ever want to come back on again.
It's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, and hopefully some of the listeners go over and listen to your future project that's coming out. You want to remind everybody really quick what it was called?
The Art Word.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. If you like what we're doing here, by the way, go support us on Facebook, Patreon, any of those social medias that you do. Yeah, thank you again, Jenny, for being on the show.